Welcome everyone joining us tonight, whether you are here live with us on Zoom or catching us on YouTube, wherever you find us. We are happy that you are joining this session. I was just sharing with the group here one of my favorite actually of the course to date. So I'm hoping that you will enjoy it as much as I have enjoyed getting it ready and prepared for you. I am going to share my little screen here with thanking our co promoters, those who have gracefully and graciously wanted to put their names to this and supported it and advertised it. And also, I just, let me just put that up for now. So we're going to keep this little slide as I always do for a few minutes before we start. In the meantime, please stay muted, because as you know now, everything you might say will be recorded for posterity forevermore and posted on YouTube. So you might just prefer to stay muted just in case. And we are grateful and thankful to all of our co-sponsors listed here for making this possible and for letting you guys know that it was happening. I'm gonna wait another couple minutes. So even if it sounds like there's just a blank, it's because I'm just waiting for more people to join us, and then we'll get started in just 1 minute. I'm also verifying that you guys on YouTube are in fact seeing this, and I hope you are. I have my spies taking a look at it right now. Okay, so I am going to stop sharing. And I'm hoping that I can have someone let me know if the YouTube is in fact working Shelly, or yeah, it's good. I can see you nodding good. All right, great. All right, there's still a few people logging in. So before we start, I just want to let you know that, if you have been enjoying this and you found it interesting, challenging, that it is bringing up a lot of stuff for you, if it is involving you in newfound arguments with your significant other or your coworker or your whatever group of friends, or if you are getting something out of this that is meaningful to you, there's always, if you haven't yet, there's always ways. We offer this for free, of course, and that's all we ever wanted to do. But if you're so inclined, if you're moved by this, and you would like to share your gratitude, maybe by making a little donation to Bet Aleph to support the work that I do through this community, you are always welcome to do that. You can go to betaleph.org. I think you have to scroll down, and you'll see the little picture of how to be an anti-Antisemite, the logo of the course. You can click on that. It'll move you to a little page, and if you go down that page, you'll see there are different ways to become a patron. We call those who want to support this work patrons to this class, and you're welcome to do that anytime. And if your heart so moves you, if you feel that this is supporting you, feeding you, please let us know by supporting it, in tangible ways. Okay. I think we're here. I think we're here, and I think we have to start. And I know I say that every class, but we have an enormous amount of history to cover, and like I said, as I open this, a lot of fascinating information tonight. I'm really eager to share this with you. So let's just dive in. Let's not wait, because I always have a goal to let you to let this be done by 8:30 Seattle time. I know some of you are joining us from other time zones, so I try to be good, and we might go a few minutes over, but my goal is to end on time. So I just wanted to take a second to kind of restate what we've already gone through over the first few sessions. We have seen so far that the hatred against Jews in this first 1,000 years of Christendom was overall a religious form of hatred. Jews had killed Jesus. Jews had rejected Jesus. Christianity had come to replace Judaism, to transcend Judaism. Christianity was superseding Judaism, was better than Judaism. Suddenly, Judaism was called the Old Testament, right? Things that are passé, redundant, and irrelevant. And Jews were painted as really, since they had rejected Jesus and killed Jesus, they were the Antichrist, right? The quintessential Antichrist, the devil himself. And we've seen that hatred, that religious hatred, culminated in the bloodbath that was the Crusades. And that opened a Pandora box of violence that through the first 1,000 years did not actually, that hatred did never really fully expressed as violent. Now that door is open, and it's going to be downhill from there. Post-Crusade, as we saw specifically last week, a new form of hatred is born out of the church's portrayal of the Jew as pure evil, as the devil. And that new form of hatred is now based on the imaginary evil Jew, that evil, that devil Jew that is now imagined to be the polluter of all that's good, like a member of a satanic cult bent on polluting and destroying Christianity from within, kind of a disease, an inner plague of Christianity. And that too, as we saw last week specifically, ended in the bloodbath of the successive blood libels that we saw spreading throughout Europe, accusations of host desecrations as also that spread throughout Europe, and eventually the Black Death and the poisoning of the well, accusations that caused so many massacres on top of the Black Death itself through the Jewish communities of Europe. But that was different, right? That was the imaginary Jew now, beyond just a religious hatred. And so at the end of the class last session, some people worried last week about how the Jews could survive in Europe from all these ongoing persecutions and violence against them. So what we have to keep in mind, which I think is important to always keep in our consciousness, that all that I am sharing, obviously my focus is on all the instances of anti-Semitism. This is the frame of the course, right? So that's what I'm going to bring up, right? But all that I'm bringing up didn't happen everywhere in Europe all at once. We have to really understand that. Maybe not a good analogy, but anti-Semitism was like a game of whack-a-mole, right? It popped up here in violent and horrendous ways, and then somewhere else. And then it died down there, and then it popped up over here, somewhere else, right? And so Jews, when the hammer fell, right? Jews fled one inhospitable place, moved out, settled somewhere else. And then when things shifted there, they fled that place to get to another place. Sometimes they even returned to the previous one, right? But understand that in between the attacks, right, and the violence, Jews managed to eke out a living. They managed to survive, always very precariously, always demeaned and always hated, but they survived. They survived in between the times of the hammer. Okay? Now we're going to travel tonight. We're going to travel to 3 different countries tonight, and we begin our travels in Spain. Now, in contrast to much of Northern Europe, where, as we've seen, Jews have faced off and on ongoing persecutions, Spain, at the same time, was an oasis. Because for centuries, under Muslim rule, Jews prospered. Jews achieved not only wealth and comfort, they also achieved power and influence over society. They were invited into the highest echelon of the political, the scientific, the philosophical, the theological life that was thriving under Islam in Spain. We even know of some Jews who became generals, like officers, generals, commanders of Muslim armies, to give you a sense of how integrated and part of society Jews were able to be for most of the time under Islam. By the 15th century, Spain had the largest Jewish population in the world, and for the 500 years that came before the 15th century, had become really the center of Jewish leadership, replacing the Talmudic academies of Babylon. Okay. Now, let me go back just a little because I want us to really set the context. By the year 715, Muslims had conquered the entire Iberian Peninsula, the entirety of Spain, what is now Spain and Portugal. Now, I want to share very briefly a map, just to give us, for some of us like me, visual learners, want to understand where all of this is taking place. So here's the map of Islam starting in the in Arabia, right, in the peninsula there, Medina, and here's the map of how Islam spreads between 600 of the Common Era, right, the century where Islam is born, all the way to 900. Now, if you look on your left, you follow the conquest of Islam, you see that that Spain, where it says Al-Andalus, which was the Muslim name of the peninsula, has been taken over already by the year 715. That's what we are talking about here. Right? The Muslims are going to try to even conquer even further north and go to the Franks kingdom there. Right? They're going to be stopped, but they're going to remain in, as you see, the cities of Saragossa, Cordoba, all of that is going to remain under the conquest of Islam, and that's where the story is tonight, where we begin tonight. So I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to come back here now that you have a visual of where we are, right there in Spain. The many Jews and few Christians that were living there were given the status of what's called dhimmi. A dhimmi was a people who belonged to a religion that was tolerated by Islam. Most of the time, the people of the book. That's how Islam defined those peoples. So Jews and Christians were tolerated as dhimmis under Islam. But as dhimmis, those Jews and Christians had rights. For example, they had the right to practice their religion, to establish their own communities. They were, however, considered second-class citizens, and they were bound to obey Muslim laws as it pertained to the government of the city, of the state, of the nation. They also had to pay additional special taxes, and to be clear and to be honest, they as well, both Christians and Jews, suffered discrimination, they suffered humiliation, and from time to time as well, violent attacks. And that depended on the whim of the local Muslim ruler. We'll talk much more about that on the session dedicated to Islam itself. And with those restrictions and with that kind of violence, Jews could still own land, so very different from what we see in Christianity. Jews could farm, they could be artisans, they practiced medicine, they participated in trade, they could work as diplomats. They were advisors and translators to the rulers, to the caliphs, right? And so we can say that the Jews were enjoying relative comfort and a better life, you would say, under Islam that they did clearly under Christianity. Christians, on the other hand, not so much. Christian, not so much, because especially in the context of Spain, Christians and Muslims fought time and time again to regain control of the peninsula. By the 11th century, for example, their fight had turned in a quasi-holy war. And Christians slowly made progress. And by the 12th century, so the 1100s, Spain became divided between small Christian territories, mostly in the north, and the Muslim Caliphate in the south. However, by the end of the 12th century, just to give you a sense of the back and forth, the Almohads, which were Muslims that came from North Africa through Morocco, overran much of Spain, and they imposed a much more extreme form of Islam, which included, for example, a demand that all dhimmis were to convert to Islam. That caused Christians to flee altogether Spain and to move north to Christian-ruled territories of France, for example. And some Jews actually took their chances and followed them back in France. And obviously, once they moved to Christian territories, their fate was the fate of other Jews in Christendom. Many other Jews found refuge in more tolerant Muslim land, and among them we know a very famous family, the family of Moses Maimonides, who fled Spain, traveled through Morocco, Algeria, what would be today Algeria, Tunisia, even farther to Libya, and ended up actually in Egypt. And a lot of Jews who fled at that time followed the same travels as Moses Maimonides' family did. And some went even farther to other places in Turkey and other places as well. By that point, it seems that the control of the peninsula could always go back and forth between Muslims and Christians. It was really a question of just wait a decade or two and someone else will come over. But ultimately, by the 13th century, we could see that Christians come to rule all of Spain except from the city of Granada, which was in the south of the country. And as the Christians come and settle in those places, they discover a society, as I mentioned earlier, where Jews were holding positions in the highest places. And that was a source of deep resentment for the new ruling Christians. In 1378, a high-ranking Franciscan priest named Ferran Martínez began a campaign against Jews in Castile, which is in the north of Spain. And in sermon after sermon, he called on Christians to expel Jews from Spain altogether. By December of 1390, so it took him a while, Martinez had become extremely powerful. It took him a decade, but by that time, his preaching and his presence was so powerful indeed that he could altogether ignore the authority of the King of Castile. Like, he had become so powerful, and he could order his priests in his diocese, which he did, to destroy all synagogues in their area. And so, following his early successes, in the morning of June 4th, 1391, he and his followers attacked the Jews of Seville. That Seville is the capital of Castile. In and during that attack, they murdered hundreds of Jews in their homes and in the streets. Many Jewish women and children were captured, and sold into slavery. A few Jews managed to flee the country, but an incredible amount of Jews converted to Christianity just to escape death. And with great speed, what we call now the pogrom of Seville, became in fact the model for more of those happening now throughout Spain. Not just throughout Spain, but beyond Spain on the islands of Majorca and Sardinia. Martinez and his followers, not unlike the flagellants of Northern Europe, you remember from last week, who during the Black Death traveled through the countryside to call out the death of the Jewish communities, and they were unfortunately very successful. Martinez and his followers were kind of a flagellant group, and during the Black Death, they too traveled through Spain, and like the flagellant, murdered Jews wherever they went. In Cordoba, in Toledo, Jews were burned alive or drowned in the nearby river. Hundreds converted to Christianity to save themselves. In Valencia and Aragon, Jews actually, having heard of what was happening in other places, Jews organized themselves, took arms to defend themselves, but were completely outnumbered by the growing mobs that city after city joined Martinez's, what I would call, Spanish Crusade. One key motivator, which was in fact betrayed by the attacks, as those were all documented, was money lending. Now, why do I say that? Because we have testimonies, we have writings that in each city, in each town that those mobs traveled through, they made sure, perhaps to rally the local population to their crusade, they made sure that the buildings that housed the records of the debt that Christians owed the Jews, all of those buildings were burned to the ground. We know because besides the Jewish homes, they were the only other buildings that were burned during those attacks. And those massacres continued in Barcelona, where also there thousands of Jews converted to Christianity rather than, being slaughtered in the streets. But through June and August of 1391, more and more cities were engulfed in that violence that broke out throughout Spain. And that continued, listen to this, all the way, off and on, again, through 1420. Between 1391 and 1420. An almost 30-year war against the Jews of Spain. 30 years. Now, through that time, when there were no attacks or violence, Jews were increasingly pressured to convert. They were forced to attend sermons whereby Christian preachers showed them the error of their beliefs. Laws were passed segregating Jews from Christians. The Talmud was banned. The number of occupations that were until that time open to Jews dwindled and shrunk to almost nothing. And scholars are estimating that almost, maybe even more than 100,000 Jews succumbed to this pressure and converted over this 30-year war against them. More than 100,000 Jews. After 1,400 years, it seemed finally that the church was succeeding in converting the Jews. This whole campaign, this 30-year war against the Jews, seemed, as far as the church was concerned, like a real success. All that the church had ever fantasized about was finally coming true. And you can imagine when 100,000 plus Jews over this time converted to Christianity that there was great rejoicing in all of the church's alleys of power. Spain was becoming the one model all other countries could emulate. Great success. And yet, within a couple generations, a growing number of Christians became deeply uncomfortable with the changes that this mass forced conversion had brought to them. Let me explain. As baptized new Christians, right? These conversos, that's the name they were given. That it means the converted ones. I mean, already there you can see, right? They were given a special name that only those Jews were given, the converted ones, the conversos. But as baptized new Christians, they now were entitled to all the rights and privileges that every other Christian enjoyed. And as people who embraced their new faith, who really stepped into this new identity, as they were now invited into, the Jews engaged in Christian life and took advantage of this change in their status. Those former Jews were now able to enter new occupations that were not available to them until that time. Some chose to continue traditionally, quote-unquote, Jewish occupations like money lending, tax collecting, but by and large, they were now allowed to be part of society, and so they did. Why wouldn't they? They could hold important posts in government. Many of them embraced the church and became priests. They became higher ups in the church hierarchy. Why wouldn't they? You know, if you're in, you're in, right? And so you can imagine that these new Christians, these conversos, made the most of their newfound liberties. We would have. Now, in 1449, in Toledo, the conversos tax collectors, as some of them obviously were ordered by the king to collect, a very unpopular tax. I don't know what tax isn't very unpopular, but maybe this one was more unpopular than the others. And just upon hearing of that new tax, that new unpopular tax, people rose up. There were riots in Toledo. But unwilling to challenge the king directly, as one who wanted to play it safe would, the mobs turned their anger not just at those conversos tax collectors, but at all the conversos. And they falsely accused these new Christians of secretly still practicing Jewish customs and rituals. By the mid-1400s, understand that most conversos had been Christians now for at least 2 generations. And one can only assume by then had really little to no ties to Judaism. But I want you to listen to this very carefully. This is probably the most critical and pivotal moment of the history of anti-Semitism. This moment that I'm about to talk about, following the 1449 riots in Toledo. After 1400 years of Christian, what we would call anti-Judaism, which was religiously based, as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, A new form of hatred is being born right there in Toledo, right there with these riots. And that new form of hatred, I'm going to call it anti-Semitism. Now, I'm going to explain why I'm making this distinction. Again, the term anti-Semitism is going to be coined hundreds of years later. But to me, this is the moment. This is the pivot in history where that becomes the case. Officials in Toledo, and beyond that elsewhere around Spain, responded to the mob's accusations, not, believe it or not by defending the conversos, ooh, surprise, but in fact by adding to the accusations of the mobs, and by now piggybacking on what their accusations were, now requiring, and I quote, purity of blood as proof of being true Christians. That is new. That is a new, how do I say that? A new form of hatred that is being inserted in the narrative, requiring purity of blood as proof of being true Christians. Because the conversos, again, Christians for 2 generations already, had Jewish blood, they were considered unworthy and unfit. And I can't emphasize enough, this is a seismic shift in Jewish hatred. Because what the authorities of Toledo and the regions of Spain were saying for the first time in world history was that Jews were not just members of a religious group that could be hated and discriminated against or whatever, but they were now, in fact, members of a race. Now, that may not have been the word they used at the time, but the definition of purity of blood is inextricably connected to the idea of race. Because anyone can change religion. Anyone can change religion. But a person cannot change his or her blood. Do you hear what I'm trying to say here? That you could no longer escape being Jewish. Even if after generations of being Christians, even if after generations of being Christian, you were still Jewish. There was no escape. Jewish hatred ran so deep, after 1400 years of perpetual attacks, denigration, demonization, that even in the moment of the church's greatest victory, in the moment where the Jews were finally converting to Christianity en masse, the thought of having ex-Jews infiltrate every stratum of society and even the church itself was an unbearable thought for Christianity. And in that moment, a new concept was invented. The concept of anti-Semitism, hating Jews not for what they believe in, but intrinsically for who they are, or what one imagines them to be. Being Jewish, to make a modern analogy now, was said to be in one's DNA. It was an inescapable hereditary condition. Now we know where that leads, because merely 500 years later, this concept of maintaining the purity of blood of your people will give us the extermination camps and the gas chambers. But it was born in Toledo in 1449. anti-Judaism was now had an added dimension to it. There's more now. You keep anti-Judaism for sure. Don't discard that. That's very helpful. But now there's also anti-Semitism, a racial form of hatred, and no longer just a religious form of hatred. We're sure going to have the religious form of hatred, but now we have the ultimate tool. And these new purity of blood laws spread quickly throughout Christian Spain, linking once again conversos to Jews and Judaism. Like I want you to imagine what this was like for these conversos. What a mind twist that was. How trapped they must have felt. There were no way out for Jews. The only way out for Jews in Christianity now was just death. Even converting, which they had pressured us to do for 1400 years, even that would not help you. Even if you complied, even if you made what for Jews really was the ultimate sacrifice, short of giving up your life, to convert, right? To become a faithful Christian. Even if you became the best Christian you could ever be, to finally be accepted, to finally be allowed to freely contribute as best you could to your Christian society, to obliterate yourself in service of the church, to serve in high positions wherever you could, to even become priests, to aspire to become a bishop one day, because you wanted to prove yourself. You wanted to be a faithful servant of the church. Even with all that, you were still rejected. You were still demonized. You were still ostracized. And ultimately, as we will see in a moment, you were still massacred. And I want you to think about this pattern, because we Jews are going to try that again and again. We tried that with Christianity, and that's the result that we got. I'm going to talk about those bloody results. But we try that in all the societies we found ourselves beyond that, in all the nation states that we will find ourselves. We assimilated. We became more Germans than the German, more French than the French, more Americans than the Americans. We try to rise to the highest echelon of authority, of government, to contribute to the societies where we've been. That's what these Jews did back in Spain in the 1400s. And time again, as we will see, we were met with violence. We were met with destruction, with will of eradication. And here in Spain, those Jews who had wanted so much to be good Christians, you were hated no longer because of your Judaism, but because of your birth, because of your blood. Because now being Jewish no longer only meant that you practiced a certain religion, but that you belong to a race, to an ethnicity. That Judaism wasn't in the Torah anymore, but it was in your blood. And after 2 generations of being Christians, you were once again accused of being Jewish. Like, can you imagine? Can you imagine? Now, linking conversos to Jews and Judaism again, the church now accused these new Christians of being false Christians. And that's a direct quote from the records that we have from the church. False Christians who were led astray by the evil Jew within. Right? I mean, hear that. They were accused of being false Christians, led astray by the evil Jew within. And so now they were also guilty of blood rituals and devil worshipping. And as a result, the violent attacks on these conversos just multiplied. King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella then created, as the cherry on the cake of this devastating movement, what we know as the Spanish Inquisition. We have to understand what the Spanish Inquisition was for. The Spanish Inquisition, we say, it was to root out the false, the Christians that did not abide by the church. And that's what I learned in Christian France, right? The Spanish Inquisition was created to deal with these new Christian Jews once again, and to root out their heresy, right? It expanded beyond that after that, and they burned whomever and whatever at the stake that just didn't fit their framework. But at the core, originally, it was against the conversos. It was against those Jews. And what happened was that if only a rumor was spread that someone saw you light candles on a Friday night, and why did you do that? If your neighbor reported that you failed to attend church regularly, or if you just happened to dislike pork, then the Inquisition came knocking at your door. And anyone could accuse anyone of heresy, of Judaizing. One would in fact never know their accusers. It was all secret. And while they were tortured into confessing, they were immediately sentenced to die either in prison or they were being publicly burned at the stake. And historians estimate that just in the first few years, 2,000 conversos were burned at the stake, and thousands more died as a result of being tortured in prison. The tortured were so violent that many just never survived to get burned at the stake. And so many conversos, as you imagine, decide to leave Spain. Some leave Spain, and as they leave Spain, they return to Judaism. I mean, what's in it for them staying Christians after all? And especially, they remain Christian, especially if they first escape to Portugal before shipping to other European countries, because the Inquisition followed them in Portugal for sure, right? And from Portugal, they shipped to other European countries. Some actually started to emigrate to the Americas. We had discovered Latin America by then, right? And so, many Jews flee to South America, but the Inquisition follows them there, wherever they went, because Spain conquered all of those places and the Inquisition followed along. There's one really good book that I'm actually basing a lot of this last few sessions on. It's by Phyllis Goldstein. It's a really good book. It has a lot of great information in that. The other book that I'm using, just to make sure I share all of my sources with you of the last couple sessions, The Jew, A History by Efron, E-F-R-O-N, John Efron. If you just do John Efron et al., you'll have that book. There's a newer edition. This is a pretty old edition, but and I have other books that I'm using, but those two are kind of critical to this part of my sharing. And Phyllis Goldstein, in her book here, writes, and I quote, in January of 1492, the last Muslim outpost of Granada fell to Christian invaders. 3 months later, King Ferdinand and Isabella issue an edict that all Jews were ordered to leave their kingdom and never be allowed to return. Staying, if you stayed as a Jew, would mean death and confiscation of all property, whichever came first. Their accusation was, as always, the rehashed and recycled accusation of leading Christians astray. And so they made the expulsion really a religious issue. And the date that they set on purpose was the 9th of the month of Av in the Hebrew calendar, which falls usually end of July, early August. And why did they choose the 9th of the month of Av in the Hebrew calendar? Because that was the anniversary of the destruction of both the first and the second temple in the Jewish calendar. Right? And they knew that, and they chose that date on purpose. And so after 1,000 years of Jewish presence in Spain, an era known in Jewish lore really as the Golden Age of Spain, what was the greatest center of Jewish life in the world was no more. Imagine if tomorrow a ruler comes to America and decrees that by the end of August, all Jews must leave America or die, and all their property will be confiscated. Just to give you a sense, and that actually happens, right? Just to give you a sense of what that felt like in the Jewish world at the time, right? That was an earthquake in the Jewish world, in fact, and that only is going to ripple through space, but is going to impact generations of Jews the world over. And as soon as the last remaining Jew leaves, the crown and the church turn now their sights to these still problematic new Christians who immediately become the new outsiders. And so the laws of blood purity are strengthened, and the Spanish Inquisition doubles down on its killing of anyone suspected of having the slightest Judaizing tendencies. Now, we are leaving Spain as the Jews did, and we are moving to Italy, as many actually Jews who escaped from Spain also did. Many traveled to Italy. What is happening in Italy at that time is what is called the Renaissance Renewal. Now, we can really call Italy Italy, although for us it's easy to conceptualize the boot of Italy, right, in Europe. But Italy did not exist then, as we understand it to be today. Italy was a mix of principalities, duchies, republics, kingdoms, all over the boot of Italy. And of course, they were the church states that had their center in Rome. And all of those will actually, by, if I'm not mistaken, 1870, so it's going to take a while, all of these are going to coalesce into one country called Italy. But Italy really is born in 1870. So Italy is a pretty new country as a whole. Jews lived mostly around and north of Rome. That was really where we lived. Sicily, the island of Sicily, was under Spanish rule. So the Jews were expelled there and moved north in 1492. 1492, that was the year of the expulsion of all the Jews. In 1541, the Kingdom of Naples also came under Spanish rule, and all its Jews were expelled north as well. So you have a lot of Jews that are moving towards the northern part of Italy in Rome, and are going to settle in what is actually still today what is known today as the industrial center of Italy, which is the northern part of Italy, just south of the Alps and north of Rome. And Rome itself, as we know, had a Jewish community there from the times of antiquity, right? And Jews also came, as they came north, to settle around Venice. And the Venetian government allowed Jews to settle there as late as the 4th century, but only to reside temporarily. Like they never were allowed to be on those lands perpetually, but they had a temporary status, which always was renewed, but they never became official. And they allowed those Jews to stay as they stayed and allowed them to engage in the traditional Jewish work of money lending. In fact, a charter was written in 1397, that stipulated that Jews could stay in Venice for no longer than 15 days at a time. Jews were to live on the land part of Italy, right? They couldn't stay on the island of Venice. They could stay there no longer than 15 days at a time. They were not allowed to practice Judaism there in public, let alone open a synagogue, God forbid. By 1509, so many Jewish refugees had flocked to the north and to the city that eventually the Venetian authorities realized that the presence of those Jews could be very beneficial, not just for the social, but mostly for the economic interests of the city. Understand that Venice was an independent city, was its own state, if you'd like, right? And the leadership there thought that money lending that the Jews provided could allow major projects to be funded. It could lift up the Christian out of poverty, and it could help develop the city and build their fleet. They had a major fleet of commerce and defense, even though they still would not, or would somewhat, in some very controversial way, allow Jews to remain longer and longer at a time. Eventually, a compromise was reached between, exclusion or expulsion and a partial right of residence. And so the city of Venice ordered in March 1516, that's an easy one to remember, 1516, it follows. In March 1516, it allowed for the creation of a strictly segregated Jewish neighborhood, right? Instead of saying to the Jews, you can stay here 2 weeks, we don't know where they were staying, whether they were there for 2 weeks, and then you got to go back, cross the waters. Now they said, okay, we're going to reach a compromise. We're going to allow you to stay, but you have to be in a segregated neighborhood of Venice, of the city itself. And the neighborhood that was chosen because, it was the kind of the polluted neighborhood, the neighborhood that really nobody wanted to live there. And the reason why nobody wanted to live there was because it was hot, it was always loud, it was always, polluted, because there was a foundry in that neighborhood. And the foundry obviously created its own pollution and all that goes with that. Now, the word for foundry in Venetian, of the Venetian of the time, the name for the word foundry was ghetto. And so that neighborhood was known to be the Ghetto Nuovo, the new foundry, or the neighborhood where the foundry was. And now the Jews lived where the foundry, right? In the ghetto, right? In the ghetto. Because that's the name of the foundry. And so, as elsewhere in the Christian world, allowing the presence of the Jews was always a balancing act between serving the interest of the state and religious prejudice. Because you could not, do away altogether with the resentment that was clearly still there against the Jews, and also the fear of competition, which I mentioned in a previous session. But this is the evolving age of the Renaissance. And so the argument that having Jews live among Christians would, provoke God's wrath really lost its power of persuasion in favor of new, you would say, early modern consideration of the raison d'etat, right? The superiority of the concerns of the state, and also the beginning of the secularization of European politics. Jews were useful to the state. They could therefore stay. Be they in that new place we call now the Jewish ghetto, where the foundry is, but they can stay. You can imagine that the church didn't take kindly to this evolution. And in fact, the church is going to fight it every step of the way, continuing to remind everybody, and specifically publicizing papal bull after papal bull, that the Jews were, quote, I quote from the papal bull, bound by their guilt to perpetual servitude, ungrateful toward Christians, repaying favors with scorn, attempting to dominate the very people whose servants they should be, unquote. That's from the Pope. Nice. But Venice, didn't listen to the Pope too much at that point. And so despite the church increasing pressure on the Jews in, watching what's going on in Venice, in the rest of Europe, because they were concerned that Venice would spread its model to others, they promote edict after edict, condemning the Talmud as blasphemous, ordering it to be burned, and extending prohibition from printing, because this is also the time that the printing press began, of 420 different Hebrew books. The church kept a list, I guess, of all the Hebrew books that it needed to keep on banning. In Rome, because Rome is still the seat of the church, all 4,000 Roman Jews were kicked out of the city and moved to the northern bank of the Tiber River. And they themselves, interestingly enough, were moved into a ghetto. It seems like Venice model is catching on. This ghetto, like most ghettos, are always small. The Jews live there in very crowded conditions, which is never good for diseases spreading and other ailments that come from being too many people in one very small place. And also, all the ghettos were closed at nighttime, locked at nighttime. In addition, as we saw last week, Jews were ordered to wear a distinctive yellow badge, as they did in Venice as well. And it was really after other Christian lands saw what was going on in Rome and in Venice that this model of ghetto and yellow badge and all of that began to spread throughout Italy and then beyond Italy in the 16th and 17th century. Now, you might say, another form of discrimination against the Jews with these ghettos. Let me talk to you about ghettos, actually. Because, in truth, being able to live separately from the Christians allowed Jews to establish a permanent presence in these cities and to carve for themselves a place in Italian society for sure, but in all the societies in which those ghettos were created, even though those ghettos imposed further restrictions. Because what the ghetto did was that it protected the Jews from Christian random attacks, right? Even though, on the other hand, one might say, yes, but it also provided Christians who wanted to attack the Jews a very easy way to find them and therefore to target them all at once. But that really didn't happen as long as the leadership of the cities needed the Jews, found the Jews useful. And so the ghetto actually were not a bad thing at the beginning. Obviously, what they become under Nazism is something altogether different. But at first, they were just, you would call them today Jewish neighborhoods, right? And, as commerce begins to replace religion as the major consideration during the Renaissance, the Jews were more and more recognized for their utility, their usefulness in the economy. Not just because of their money-lending abilities, but because of their ability of commerce and trade and as merchants themselves. And so Jews and Christians began to socialize more freely. And kind of a shared culture is allowed to flourish. And not to think that Venice was, the new Spain, the new paradise on earth, Jews were always reminded of their differences. Jews were still Jews. They were still bound by their own religion. They were still had their separate way of life, and they were always set apart from the Christians. There was always this hierarchical dimension of relationship. And as synagogues are now allowed to be built in Rome and even in Venice, Jews who may have adopted actually Italian names in order to interact and socialize with the Christians through their business dealing, through the commerce that they were involved with the Christians, they still retain a Hebrew name inside the ghetto and at synagogue. So they live kind of this dual life. Now, cultural exploration didn't mean negation of one's Jewish identity. And clearly, however, the Italian Renaissance offered a different kind of openness for the Jews. This is the part where I tell you about the good stuff about this era. Remember, I hinted at it last week and said, there's going to be 2 or 3 minutes of look how well the Jews were doing. This is it. So enjoy. There was a certain kind of openness that really happened. We know that, as I said, Jews were still parked behind walls of the ghetto, right? But there was an openness nonetheless, right? And with that slight openness, what the Renaissance brought to the world altogether also impacted the Jews as well. New discoveries such as the printing press, as I just mentioned, gunpowder, new continents, 1492, the Copernican system, the questioning of Earth's centrality in the known universe. There is new art, there is new architecture. All of that was of great interest to the Jews. And so synagogues were built, or in fact rebuilt, influenced by the Renaissance art and architecture all across Europe. Rabbis began to include science and medicine in their work on Jewish law. We see that in their writings, as really a new scientific knowledge begins to spread, in fact, throughout the Jewish world. Those conversos who had obtained university education because they were conversos, right? They became the first Jewish physicians as they returned to Judaism. And they played a critical role in the dissemination of scientific knowledge and critical thought throughout the Jewish world. In Padua, there's a university there in Padua, began to actually even open its doors to Jews. Can you imagine? Jews are allowed to go to universities, secular universities. And when that happens, when the University of Padua opens up, you see Jews flocking from all corners of Italy, Germany, Poland, even from the Ottoman Empire. And then they get educated there, and they begin to disseminate that secular knowledge in their respective Jewish communities. So as the Renaissance brought with it the new science and the study of history, those educated Jews begin to write historical works. Jews for the first time begin to reflect on the historical journey of the Jews through time. And they find a sense of parallel between the history of the Jews and there is the history of the non-Jewish world. They see themselves moving with the evolution of the world. All right, so that was our 5 minutes of great light and great evolution. We are going to end our evening together with one last stop. We're going to Germany now. So pack your bags. We are moving north. We're going to Germany. I just, as I was rereading my notes earlier, I was struck by how tonight, talking about Spain, Italy, and Germany as the pivotal time of that era in Jewish history, those are going to be the three main nations who are going to be embracing fascism in just a few hundred years. And so just fascinating to see how Jewish history turns between Spain, Italy, and Germany through those few hundred years that I'm sharing with you. Anyways, end of my little parenthesis. It is clear to us that Jews were thriving through the Italian Renaissance. And as that happens, there is a new religious Christian movement that is born in Northern Europe. And that new Christian movement begins to cast a dark cloud over its Jewish population. As early as the 16th century, we would call it revolution of the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther, born 1483, dies 1546. Martin Luther, who shows, at first it seems, a very conciliatory attitude toward the Jews, which was really a stark difference, a welcomed stark difference from the traditional anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, late medieval Christian church, Catholic Church. But later on, it seems that this seemingly welcoming of Judaism at first begins to turn to an increasingly hostile and even downright violent stance that follows an active demand for at minimum, an expulsion of all Jews from Germanic territory. And this shift from what was seemingly an embrace to a complete rejection by Martin Luther himself within a few years, a decade maybe, causes many scholars to question, actually, to go back and question his early motivation. On one side, in the early days, we see him attack the Catholic Church, vehemently attacking the Catholic Church and accusing the Catholic Church of mistakenly persecuting the Jews. He insists and emphasizes that it's important to remember the Jewish origin of the Christian faith, and he calls seemingly wholeheartedly for tolerance toward the Jews because of that. But at the same time, as we can read from the pamphlets that he's writing, there is a little bit of, as part of his writing, an anticipation, let's say. He's anticipating, he's hoping, he's yearning, he's expecting that the Jews, with with his warm embrace, obviously compared to the Catholic Church, will see that Christianity is not all that bad after all. They will see the light of Christianity, thanks to him, of course. And they will eventually come around and, being welcome in the bosom of the church, will feel and understand the superiority of Christianity. And of their own free will, of their own recognition, they will open-heartedly convert en masse to Christianity. And in fact, we can decipher from his own writing that this was his ultimate rationale for affording Jews greater welcome, greater tolerance. And he doesn't really, he's kind of upset, to say the least, when the Jews just, we're not really buying it, right? And so they kind of adopted this kind of wait and see attitude, which wasn't really a change at all. And Luther was more than frustrated with them. With this, now the tone is changing, and I'm changing my tone as he's changing his. These blind, stubborn, mistaken Jews who continue to deny Christ. And now he's speaking in violent terms because of this disappointment towards those Jews. And in 1543, he writes the most bitter pamphlet that he titles, and I quote, "Concerning the Jews and Their Lies," end quote. That's the name of his pamphlet. Now he's completely reversed. Now he's let go of his, death by assimilation, very similar to what the Greek did, if you remember some sessions ago, right? The first session, I mentioned that. He thought he could Hellenize Jews into becoming Protestants, right? And so now, with this new pamphlet concerning the Jews and their lies, he set as his main goal, now in the open, the ultimate forced conversion of all Jews. And since Jews won't see the light of Christian truth on their own, well, these blasphemous Jews would have to be strongly pressured to convert or be expelled altogether from Christian lands. In his pamphlet, he calls the Jews, I quote again, this damned, rejected race. Interesting word here, race, right? Their lying and blasphemy and cursing, we cannot tolerate them. First, their synagogues should be set on fire. Secondly, their homes should be broken down and destroyed. Thirdly, they should be deprived of their prayer books and their Talmuds. Fourthly, their rabbis must be forbidden under threat of death to teach anymore. Fifthly, I'm still quoting, so bear with me. Fifthly, traveling privileges should be forbidden to the Jews. So we want to expulse them, but they can't travel, they can't leave. So a little bit of a rock and a hard place for the Jews there. Sixthly, they must be stopped from usury. Seventhly, let the young and the strong Jews and Jewesses be given the flail, the axe, the hoe, the spade, and the distaff, and the spindle. End quote. This is, from the earlier so welcoming Martin Luther. Suddenly his true colors are now showing. And these calls, written in the text of the Protestant Reformation, still there, will, as you can imagine, echo over the centuries with devastating consequences. And so it is very clear that despite his early pretending to the contrary, Luther had always been and is consistently hostile to Judaism, because he never considered Judaism to be a legitimate religion. And his only objective was to usher Judaism's disappearance through the mass conversion of all Jews peacefully or violently. And so Judaism, from the onset, represented for Luther the opposite of true Christianity, and the Jews shared in, as for the Catholic Church, the role of eternal opponent, eternal adversary, the role of the devil himself, the ultimate threat to whole of Christendom. And so through the 16th and into the 17th centuries, it was this extremely hostile attitude displayed in Luther's texts that became most influential. And a wave of expulsion followed, which affected Jewish communities throughout Germany, that in fact only accelerated as the Reformation gained ground. Now, I want to end today to kind of give us a sense of, because I've been talking a lot about Jews were kicked out of here, Jews were kicked out of there, just kind of give you a sense of what was happening. And how Jews were really traveling, I would say, throughout Europe during these days. So let me just give you a few examples. So we know, obviously I talked about the expulsion of the Jews of Spain in 1492. Right, but that was not the first, unfortunately. Jews were expelled from France. Actually, they were expelled from France 3 times. So when you hear that Jews were expelled from France 3 times, and I'm going to give you the dates, it means that they were asked back by France. So he was dependent, all the time dependent on what did France need at that time. And if France needed to expand its economy, to rebuild its armies, if there was whatever was going on, and they needed Jews, and they needed the commerce, and they needed to regrow their trades, the Jews were welcomed back until they were expulsed again. So France expulsed its Jews in 1182, 1303, so just 20 years later, and 1394. So about 100 years later, right? Jews were expulsed from England in the year 1290. And Jews are not coming back. There were no Jews, or, maybe a handful. I think it was like 4, 5, 6 Jews that we know of in England for 400 years. For 400 years, Jews are not coming back to England until the late 1600s and the early 1700s. For 400 years, right? And we know historically, by the way, that's the years that Shakespeare, in a land devoid of Jews, Shakespeare writes The Merchant of Venice. It causes you to wonder, what did he know about Jews? There were no Jews around. But what is important to know is that for those 400 years of England being Judenrein, devoid of Jews, empty of Jews, was the most anti-Semitic, virulently anti-Semitic time in England in those 400 years. Why? Because of what I talked about last week about the imaginary Jews, right? You no longer needed to see Jews face to face. You only needed to have the stories of the Jews, to believe the stories of the Jews, to have to be anti-Semitic. You didn't need to have Jews around. You could be anti-Semitic without any Jews around. That's why it's really important for us, because we'll see what's happening today. And the anti-Semitism that is happening today is mostly based, as we'll talk at length, I promise, about the imaginary Jew. Because there are parts, let's talk about just here in America. There are parts of America that are virulently anti-Semitic, and there are little to no Jews in those states, in those regions. Well, again, why am I taking so much time talking about history? Because history is here. It's here. It's in America today. It's not passé to be forgotten. It is here. And England gives us one of those very clear examples of what anti-Semitism looks like in a place devoid of Jews. Germany expels its Jews in 1348 and 1498. Hungary expels its Jews in 1349, so just after Germany, and in 1360. Now, Jews, it's interesting because where do they go? Right. So in the case of France, you understand that they come back and forth, but mostly not everybody comes back and forth. Like once you expulse once or twice, got it, you know. So you see a lot of those Jews moving farther and farther east, right? So maybe they were expelled from France, and they come to Germany, and then they expel from Germany, and they go further east, and they come to Poland. And that's really the beginning of the growth of the Jewish community of Poland and Lithuania, where most Jews who are American Jews today come from. They were refugees of those countries that expelled them time and time again. The Jews of Spain, I think I mentioned that, they first moved to Portugal, but then there were marriages between the Spanish and Portuguese crown, and so the Inquisition followed them. Many came to Northern Europe. There was this place called Amsterdam in the Netherlands, where they were at the time of the Renaissance. They were experimenting with a religious-free state, the state of Amsterdam. And so some Jews, one of the most famous one being Spinoza, came, and his family came and landed there and could live in that place where there were no religious discrimination. Jews followed the conquistadors, and as I mentioned, to Latin America. So that's when you have the first Jewish communities in Latin America. From Portugal, they settle in Brazil. From Spain, they settle in the rest of Latin America and Central America. So we have Jewish communities in those lands from the early 1500s, 1400s, 1500s. And in America as well, in the United States, obviously not the United States, from the 1600s. And those Jews actually come more from those Jews who were expelled from Central and Western Europe. I'm trying to juggle a lot of different balls here. I'm hoping I'm not overwhelming you. But so those Jews who arrive in Poland, those Jews who arrive in Lithuania, though they are, most welcome, we'll talk about what happens to them later, they also from time to time are expelled. So in Lithuania, they're expelled in 1445 and again in 1495. And again, they're brought back, and eventually settle there. In Poland, we know that Jews begin to settle there post-Crusades. Before the Crusades, by the 10th century, Jews begin to have roots in Poland, and then post-Crusades, increasingly the community grows and grows and grows because of those wave of immigration from Central and Western Europe. And as we will see, Poland, now that Spain is gone, it is Poland, Lithuania, all of that area of Eastern Europe that will become ultimately the next greatest center of Jewish life, just like Spain. And just like Spain, as we will see, who had, like I said, 1,000 years of Jewish life, which until the Christians invaded in the last 200 years, that was 1,000 years of the golden age of Spain, right? 1,000 years of Jewish life and the golden age of Spain. The Jews arrive in Poland in 900s, and there will be, just like for Spain, 1,000 years of the golden age of Poland. That would also come to the most devastating earthquake in the Jewish world in the mid-1900s, as we will, as we know. Okay, it's always fascinating to me. 1,000 years here, 1,000 years there. We'll see what happens with America. The jury is still out. We've been here since the 1600s, so we are 400 years into that history. But the jury is still out for what comes next. Okay. It is 8:28. See, I promised I would keep you on time. I see there were some chats, but I don't have the time to look at the chat as I share all of this information. If there were questions on the chat, please put them again on our Facebook page. If you're a patron, you have access of that Facebook page. And I actually have been posted a couple of very interesting articles and things that are coming, to my inbox. There was one that I posted about this new fad about the Hanukkah gnomes, the garden gnomes. I don't know if you came across that article. I posted it there. An article that was in the forward that talked about how the gnomes themselves are anti-Semitic descriptions. The point, we talked last week about the way that Jews were forced to dress. The pointy hats and the weird clothing, those were the ways that were imposed on the Jews to dress in those times that stayed with the Christian world. And so read that article if you have access to that. To our Facebook page, but I'm sure you can find it. It's I think it was in the forward. I'm not exactly sure anymore. And there was another thing that I posted earlier. Let me just quickly look at it. It's just one click away, so I don't have to rack my brain because it's right there. It's just loading right now. So I have a friend who, after that article came around, discarded her Hanukkah gnome. There was an article about by Joshua Malina. If you are like me, a fan of The West Wing, you remember Joshua Malina. He's a Yale educated, and he wrote an article about why is Hollywood still inviting um, what's his name? Um,
Mel Gibson.
Mel Gibson, yeah, Mel Gibson, to do movies when he is clearly a rabid anti-Semite. And that's a very provocative article, but he also had a Facebook post about how he wanted to post that article first on the Yale Facebook page and how he was banned and rejected for posting this article. It's fascinating. Um, so you can find the article itself. That article was in the Atlantic, the magazine The Atlantic, called "Cancel Mel Gibson." So you can easily find that anywhere. Um, and if you're interested in reading what he posted on his Facebook, just email me. I can send you what the back and forth with Yale was, which was deeply anti-Semitic, and he called them on it, and that didn't help. It seems that there is always an exception when it comes to Jews. Somehow anti-Semitism is acceptable, and other forms of racism are not. But anti-Semitism gets a pass. So that's why we need to keep confronting it and voicing when we see it everywhere, like we saw it on that PBS special last time. It's everywhere, unfortunately. We have maybe a few minutes for maybe one question. If there is a question that is burning for anyone, just unmute and go for it. Cheryl, I'm not saying your last name so that you remain anonymous. So Cheryl, go ahead.
That's fine. I was just sitting, maybe I missed something, but I'm wondering how Spain became such a huge center for Jews. How did they end up there at that time?
Oh yeah, so you missed the beginning. The Jews, first of all, were there since Roman times, right? As part of the expulsion of the Jews from our Holy Land, our homeland, and Rome having conquered all the lands around the Mediterranean. So Jews were probably slave traded all the way to Spain and settled and created communities there. And they grew over time, mostly because, by the time Islam takes over those parts of the land, by 700 they have conquered Spain and the entire peninsula there. Jews really are become kind of the protected second-class citizens who are really allowed most of the time. There's always, gaps and dark times in that history, but allowed to really thrive. And they are also exposed to what Islam brought with them, which was their philosophy and the embrace of also a lot of the Greek philosophy. Those of us who are studying Maimonides' Guide of the Perplexed together have delved into that in depth. So the Jews are really exposed to a new way of life. First of all, they are able to, as a protected minority, to participate in all dimensions of life there. And there are, this is the place where Kabbalah is going to, begin and bloom. This is the place where Maimonides is from. This is the place where some of the greatest rabbis are born. And so as the academies of Babylonia begin to fade, the intelligentsia, the intelligentsia of Spain becomes more and more prominent, and they become the new Babylon, if you want, the new center for Jewish life. This is post Talmudic, right? So the Talmud is already written by the year 600. So this is all post Talmudic. But if the Jews of the world used to write letters to the sages of Babylon to ask them for specific rulings on this Jewish law or that Jewish law, now they write Toledo, they write Cordoba, they write the Jews of Castile. That's where the questions are directed now, and that's how you know that you have the new center of the greatest lights in the Jewish world in Spain.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hadia.
Thanks. You keep talking about the Jews. How many Jews were there? I'm very confused.
Well, less and less if you follow all this history. There, again, I mean, when we talk about Jewish communities here and there, like for example, I mentioned tonight there were 4,000 Jews in Rome, right? That gives you a sense of how big those communities were. When I mentioned last session about the Jews of Norwich, right? All 40 of them being imprisoned, 31 of them being killed. But, again, how many Jews in the Jewish community of Norwich? 40, right? So the Jewish, we can't think of the Jewish community the way we would think of the Jewish community today, where there are, we think there are 75,000 Jews in this greater Seattle area, for example, or in Washington State, I'm not sure, right? There are 3 million Jews in New York. Okay, that's not what's happening in Europe. We're talking about small communities here and there. I mean, if Rome had probably one of the biggest one would imagine, Rome has 4,000 Jews. That's the scale you want to think of.
Okay.
Yeah.
That helps.
Okay. We good? The rest, again, if you're a patron, you have access to that Facebook page, and you can ask your questions there, and I'm waiting for them, and I'm happy to answer them so we can continue this conversation. If not, we're going to leave it at this today, and we'll see you next week for the next installment. More fun to be had. Thank you for being here. Oh, I didn't open with shalom. At least we should close with shalom. Shame on me. I want to close with shalom. So bear with us for just one more time. And just close your eyes and find your breath. And take a breath, if you so choose, to chant shalom with me. Shalom. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your support. We'll continue next week.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night and thank you.
Good night. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.